It all started because Jerry was hungry. Not just regular hungry, no. Jerry had reached that special level of starvation where he would gladly fist fight an elderly woman for a sandwich. He had spent the entire morning stuck in pointless meetings, nodding along as his boss droned on about synergy and thinking outside the box, when all Jerry could think about was getting his hands on the perfect hot dog from Big Tony's famous street cart. Big Tony wasn't just any hot dog vendor. He was a legend. The man had been serving up juicy, perfectly grilled, a slightly questionable but undeniably delicious hot dog for the past 20 years. I felt like a patriotic experience, like an eagle should cry every time you took a mouthful of that smoky, ketchup-covered masterpiece. So naturally, when Jerry finally burst out of his office building at exactly 3 p.m. he sprinted down the block like an Olympic athlete feeling led by pure desperation. He could already taste it, the bite, the mustard at the end when he saw it. Or rather, he didn't see it. Big Tony's car was gone. Jerry froze mid-step, his soul leaving his body. No nitrogen monoxide. He spun in frantic circles, scanning the street. How could this happen? Was this a dream? A nightmare? Had he finally succumbed to hunger? Induced hallucination? Then out of the corner of his eye, he spotted it. Tony's car was being wheeled away by a rival vendor. And just like that, Jerry's lunch break turned into an action movie. Jerry didn't hesitate. He took off running, dodging pedestrians, knocking over a poor guy carrying a tray of iced coffees ripped to his caffeine addiction, and nearly getting hit by a cab. But nothing mattered except that cart. The thief was an Avenger, the guy in a cheap apron with an aggressive mustache. That screamed feeling energy. He was pushing the hot dog cart toward a rival food truck, a smug little operation called Frankfurter. Frankus. Jerry had never trusted Frank. Looked like the kind of guy who microwaved his hot dogs, and that was an unforgivable crime. Jerry launched himself forward and grabbed cart handle. What do you think you were doing? The thief sneered, taking over the business. Buddy, Big Tony shouted, Frankfurter Frank. Son. Jerry gasped out, oh yeah. The thief yanked the cart. Well, he just did. The crowd was gathering. Now, people live for a good street brawl. And nothing was more New York than watching two grown men fight over a hot dog cart. Someone started recording a guy the monkeys cut down, going for the bombs. Another person changed. We want blood or ketchup. Jerry refused to let go. The thief refused to let go. And before either of them knew what was happening, the sheer force of their struggle sent the entire hot dog cart rolling downhill. Now, if there's something physics has taught us, it's that an uncontrolled, condemned, loaded street car rolling at high speeds through a crowded city is never a good thing. The car picked up momentum. It crashed into a bicycle messenger, who went flying like an extra in an action movie. It skidded past the police officer, spraying mustard everywhere like it wasn't crime scene from a culinary disaster movie. It barreled through an outdoor yoga class, leaving a trail of squashed buns and horrified influencers. And Jerry was still holding on. Like a true hero, he jumped onto the cart, determined to stop its deadly path before it took. Beyond half the city, the crowd screamed. Someone was playing the Mission Impossible theme from their phone. Just as the car was about to collide with the wedding party, Jerry did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the ketchup lever, pulled it as hard as possible. A literal explosion of ketchup erupted from the cart, creating a massive red mess that engulfed everything in a 5-foot radius. Each lamb led into the wedding cake, sending it toppling over the bright ladder. Primal screamed. The groom looked like he had just witnessed a war crime. And then just as suddenly as it all began, the cart stopped. Jerry, covered in ketchup panting, looked up. Big Tony was standing there. Big Tony had seen the whole thing. There was a long silence. Then Tony walked forward, slowly nodding. Kid, he said, voice heavy with emotion, that was the single most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Jerry choked back tears. I just wanted a hot dog, man. Tony pulled out a perfectly grilled hot dog from his apron pocket. You earned this. The crowd cheered. Jerry took the hot dog. The heavens opened up somewhere in the distance. An eagle screamed in approval, and that showed Jerry became a New York legend.